everyone. Welcome to Yachting International Radio, the Wellbeing project, and you're with Karine, Rayson from the Crew Coach. Now, I have two wonderful guests with me today, and they are also part of my membership ptsd tribe, and I think that Ari and Sally actually connected in the membership, and this is a very rare interview. I think it's the only interview that I've done with two other participants. So thank you both so much for showing up today.
Thanks for having me, Karine.
So let's get started. The reason why we are showing up today is because we're talking about quite a personal topic for all of us, and that is the use of alcohol. So when does it become problematic? Now, Ari and Sally will share their experiences with alcohol and where they are at now. And then we're just going to unpack it. And with all my interviews, I don't prepare questions. It's just a natural conversation because I feel we can get so much more from just being open. So let's start with yourself, Ari. Say background about yourself. Let's start off with the yachting industry, how long you've been in the yachting industry for, and your journey with alcohol per se.
Yeah, so I'm Ari. I'm 34 years old, 33 rather, 34 soon, and I'm from Australia, and I've been in yachting for just over 5 years now. And it's been really rewarding, amazing industry. I'm really glad I transitioned into it when I did. It's got a lot to offer a lot of people. Shall I talk about alcohol now?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah. So as an Australian, it's quite, sorry, Karine, did you want to say something?
For the listeners, we have done an interview together. So if you do go to Yachting International Radio and maybe search Ari or a keyword, it might come up, and it's a very valuable interview to watch. I know Sally's watched it, so maybe Sally can also give feedback when we go over to Sally about what she got out of that interview. So yeah, Ari, over to you. Back to that question of your experience with alcohol and how it's ended, like, I guess, how it has brought you to where you are today.
Okay, look, alcohol, I think we can all agree, is a lot of fun, but it has its issues as well. Culturally, in Australia, it's quite common to start drinking young, and I wasn't really an exception. I started drinking at 13, maybe even 12. I think actually I had a few drinks, and then by 13, I was drinking basically every weekend. And you're drinking to the point of blackout most weekends, and it became so part of my nature, part of my culture, that it was really a part of my identity. It became funny, I guess. I was a guy that always would have these crazy stories to tell, and it led me to some amazing scenarios, I suppose. I went to some amazing places and met some amazing people, but I guess it was always sort of, I caveat that with, there was always this sinister underside of it, that unfortunately bad things would happen to me. I put myself in situations which were unfortunate. There was a time when I was viciously assaulted, grievously harmed, 12 surgeries, almost $40,000 worth to fix, and I look okay now, but that was 3 years of that, just because I was out drinking and doing stupid stuff one night. So, and some relationships have been challenged. I'm fortunate to say that a lot of those people have stuck by me and supported me through that. So I don't think I've really lost anyone, but it very easily could have happened. And I suppose I knew it was an issue in my early 20s. I knew it was an issue because I was starting to get into dramas. By the time I was 22, I had that incident which I mentioned, and I was trying to battle it already at that point, but I didn't really have great success with it until my late 20s. And it took some very frank conversations with myself, realizing what it was, because there's not much talk about it. Well, there is a bit more now, but back 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of people talking about it, that it was such an issue. And when people think of what an alcoholic is, they don't really identify with people that are just having fun, or perhaps, aren't hitting people or yelling at people or being violent or aggressive, which isn't my nature. But it was definitely having quite an influence on my life negatively, and I wasn't achieving the things I wanted to achieve because I was hungover. I was stressing those relationships, as I was talking about, and finally, I'd say I've got a really good handle on it now. It took a long period of abstinence, several attempts at it, really, and But yeah, I've been working on it for probably 10 years and been successful at it for the most part for about 3 years or so, but with a few slip ups, but definitely, and then great success within the last 12 months, I'd say.
Yeah, incredible. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that, Ari. I'm going to go to Sally, but then I want to go back to you and ask what strategies you put into place to get to where you are today.
Sure.
Thank you. Sally, maybe we can start off, your background in yachting, the relationship that you have with yachting, where you're at today, and your experience of watching Ari's previous interview.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sally. I was in the yachting industry for 8 years. I've been out of the industry now for 2. I watched Ari's interview on Yachting International Radio, and I realised that his story was so similar to mine. I started drinking at a very young age. We would drink every weekend. And of course, when I got into my 20s, it was a problem, but I guess the difference is I never really acknowledged it. I just brushed it off as, whatever. I was having fun and I was just a bit drunk that night. As it's progressed into my late 20s, there have been some really catastrophic nights that have resulted not in physical harm, but in harm not just to myself, but my husband mostly, in the respect that I lost my engagement ring when he first gave it to me, which he spent, a lot of money on, which was so awful for both of us. I think, so that was maybe like the first point where I was really like, whoa, this is a problem. And he told me then, this is a problem, you can't continue like this. And I guess it's taken from then till I actually watched the interview to really look at myself and go, yeah, there is a problem here. Because I just thought, I'm just drinking at the weekends and, sometimes in the week, and a Monday, actually that's every day. And it's just taken a while to sort of acknowledge there's a problem. So that's where I am now. So
okay, so what actions specifically have you taken to abstain?
So after I saw the interview, I decided that I would just sort of stop drinking every day. I would start alternating the day. So I would drink one day and I'd not drink the next day. And I sort of put it down to the confinement. I wasn't doing anything. I didn't have anything that I needed to get up for, whatever. And then when we were talking in our goal setting group chat, I sort of realised actually it was always coming back round to drinking, and I was like, oh God, this is the problem. I need to face it now. And then I was like, right, okay, from Sunday, so I allowed myself to drink on the Saturday night with some friends. From the Sunday until my husband returns, which was, I think, about 6 weeks. It's now even longer because he's not coming home on time. I would just stop drinking. And apart from one evening I had a glass of wine, it's been okay. It's been pretty okay. I mean, it's not the best of times. On a Friday night, I'm like, this is so boring.
That's a massive sense of accomplishment, because it's not easy. And I'm assuming, did you go through any experience of withdrawals or anything like that? Cravings, urges?
Definitely cravings, which I've managed to subside with non-alcoholic beer. So when I'm like yesterday, I finished my week on a high. My friend was popping over early evening to, catch up before our curfew came in. And I was like, oh my God, I'd love to have a glass of wine right now. Like, and I have a bottle of wine and I have gin in my cupboard where I just didn't finish it before I started this. I'm like, oh, I'm like, no, it's okay. I've got a non-alcoholic beer. So I had that. And after that, I was like, okay, fine. I feel better now. Like, I feel like I don't need, it was just that initial, like, oh, I needed something to celebrate with that wasn't tea or water. So that really, really helped. But I don't think I've had any side effects, only good ones, you know, not being hungover every day. Like, I get up at 7 or 8 and I actually do yoga, and I can do my French lessons, and I'm not like, oh, why don't I understand this? And now I'm like, oh yeah, that's why that's that. And oh, another rule. Oh, great, cool. I'll write that down. And then it's, you know, everything's just so much clearer, which is just so much better.
That's brilliant. And I know that Ari said to you when you came to this realization that I'm going to abstain, to not worry if you do have a drink or two, because you can always start again. It's not a big deal. And I think a lot of people give up on themselves because they're like, oh, I failed. Well, what's the point? So just as well continue drinking. And it's not about that. It's a lot of it is about learning about your triggers. And one of your triggers that you mentioned was being in a social environment or being around people you don't know and using it as a social lubricant. And on the first weekend, you decided, you know what, this is going to be a bit too much for me, so I'm going to stay at home. And then you build up the confidence when you feel okay with being in that environment, a drinking environment, to not drink.
Yeah. I think, I mean, when I had this glass of wine, I was at a social event, and basically I didn't know anyone, and my friend, she was like, come along, it'll be, and I was like, you know what, I can't stay indoors forever. Like, I need to continue to learn how to be social without it. Oh, and I got there and I was like, oh, and everyone was speaking in French, no one was speaking in English. And I was like, after, where do you come from? What do you do? I was like, ugh. And I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm going to have a glass of wine. And we'd been talking about it because before I left, I was sat at home and I was like, oh, we could just have one gin and tonic and no one would know. And then I was like, if I have one, in my mind, I'd be like, oh, I've had one, I'll have two. Then I'd have more drinks there. So I was like, no. So I put the bottle back. I went straight to my friends. I was like, I'm really sorry I'm early because I can't be at home with everything around me. And she was like, that's so good, well done. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, thanks. And then when we went there, I was like, and she was like, okay, one, you can have one. And I was like, okay, all right, thanks. So I knew that if I wasn't with her, I would have been like, well, no one really knows. I'll just continue to have a few more glasses. And then I would have been so much more drunk than normal because I haven't been drinking. And she was like, how do you feel now? And I was like, much better. And she was like, back to your non-alcoholic beer. And I was like, okay. And then it was fine. That's like, I sort of had that little like buzz, I suppose, but it felt really nice to not be gradually getting more and more drunk either, which is what I would normally do. And then I'd be like, whoa.
Yes.
Good French anyway. So I'm so glad that she sort of had my back, and yeah, sort of got through that evening that way. And I didn't feel guilty the next day. I was kind of like, that was good. I only had one. I didn't lose control. I didn't then just throw the towel in. And I think coming from what Ari said about, you know, don't beat yourself up about it. And I'm kind of like, yeah, it was just one. That's okay. Try not to do it again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. Ari, do you have anything to add to that?
I'd just say hats off to Sally. That's an amazing accomplishment. I think, you know, there's all different ways to to tackle it, and strategies that are going to be different from person to person. But for me, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, your final goal is not to be abstinent from alcohol, it's to be in control of your alcohol intake. So to me, it sounds like that was a massive win. You've gone there with a goal of not being drunk, and you left not being drunk, and you've managed to enjoy one glass responsibly, and ultimately that is your final goal. So you managed to accomplish that, and you did it with aplomb. So really, really well done. That's great.
Mm.
I mean, it wasn't all my doing, I must admit. If it was up to me, I would have finished the bottle. But
well, in a way, it is your doing, because you've put the support network in place, haven't you? This is a friend that you've reached out to. You've understood and you've identified that this person is going to be able to assist you in this, and you've put yourself in the scenario in which they could assist you. You can't do everything on your own. So this person's understood the scenario, summed it up really, really well, and said, look, she wants to have a glass of wine. So under my supervision, she's going to have a glass of wine, and then I'm going to make sure that that's all she has, and she's enjoyed it. And now you've left with a really positive experience. So in all, this has been a positive experience on the whole, in which you managed to enjoy the alcohol. So from this, you're going to learn so much. And there probably will be setbacks in the future. Hopefully there won't be, but if there is, if you did have 3 or 4 glasses of wine, what you'll remember back to that time that you did enjoy it responsibly, and you're like, wow, you know what, that's where I want to be at. I'll get back to that point. And if I just want to relay, perhaps from my own experience, I wasn't really going off anyone who had any insight to offer me in this. So the way I tackled it was absolute abstinence. And like you said, you weren't going to social engagements, you weren't interacting with people, and that was kind of my strategy. And in hindsight, that wasn't optimal, to just lock yourself away from everyone, because I feel in some ways, while my mental health and physical health was getting better in some capacities, in other ways it was perhaps slightly suffering, and that I was not being as socially interactive as I'm used to being in the past. So I think a balance needs to be struck in that. So if you're having 1 glass of wine, but you're still having these social interactions, which obviously you crave, then on the whole, this is net positive as opposed to net negative, just because you've had 1 glass of wine. So, I mean, I'm not an authority in this, so I don't want to coach you in the correct way to do it. I could just speak from my own experiences as to how that worked. But I think what you've done, to me, sounds like treading that line of balance really, really well. So I would say credit to you. That's an excellent accomplishment.
Very much. Thanks a lot.
So with regards to justifications, I'd love to know a little bit more about what your justifications were. So for example, you might not be abusive, or they call it the weekend warrior. You're only drinking on the weekends, therefore you don't have an issue. Like, what are some of those justifications?
I could start there if you like. So justifications for me is that I'm an extremely entertaining drunk. Like, I'm witty, I'm smart, I tell great jokes, I'm funny, and then that sort of degrades over the night to maybe larrikin antics, and maybe I don't know, just I probably don't do it anymore, but maybe in my 20s, to some light vandalism, tipping over a bin or whatever, which was hilarious at the time, and things like that. And then the next day there'd be stories, and people, how funny was that? That was hilarious. That was great. And so that would overcome and assuage the feelings of guilt and the physical feeling of being extremely hungover and perhaps not accomplishing anything the next couple of days. And that was a justification for me, is that it was funny. I was giving something of reward to my friends, and that they had a funny story, they were entertained, and I felt I was a bit like a court jester, jumping around for everyone else's pleasure at my own expense. So that was a massive justification to me, that it was just so entertaining, and that perhaps I was the center of attention in a way. And I think perhaps it's really hard, I guess, looking back. I wouldn't have thought that I was socially anxious, but I suppose perhaps I was, and I was using the alcohol to overcome that social anxiety. I mean, it's such a long time ago now, but that seems to make a lot of sense in hindsight. So the justification was, I just need to relax a bit, and so I can be part of this social scene, I suppose.
It's amazing how the brain can condition us to associate things. So, for example, something like excessive drinking should be regarded or perceived as dangerous, unhealthy, unhelpful. But your justification has forged a positive association with drinking. So when you work with people that are resistant to change, a effective tool is to do a cost benefit analysis or pros and cons list to work out what are the positives and what are the negatives. And what you find is that there's so many more negatives rather than positives, but the positive is so strong that we can't even think about the side effects. So isn't it, it's fascinating how the brain works to create these associations around things that are not so positive.
Oh, absolutely, Karine. I think you're spot on there. And I think even to this day, is I still really enjoy alcohol, and I do intend to enjoy alcohol responsibly in the future. I think I've said as much. There's going to be occasions. I'm getting married, hopefully sometime this year. COVID will, but I want to have a bucks night. I want my guy friends to be around. I want to go out. I want to drink too many beers, and I want to do that in a way that's, but with a plan. And I'm justifying that, aren't they? Because like I deserve it and whatever. And it seems illogical. Why would you put yourself in a situation where I'll probably be hungover for 2 or 3 days afterwards? But why would you do that? It's really hard to actually justify to you or to anyone why you would do that for yourself. But like you're saying, the positive, the one positive of having that fun experience for a fleeting amount of time, a few hours, you weigh that up as more valuable than the preceding and the pain afterward, the post pain as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sally, how about you? Your justifications?
I guess, like relatively similar to Ari, where I definitely used it as a social lubricant. Like I think that's where I still miss it the most now. And once I've had a few drinks, I get like I feel like I'm more witty, like a little bit funny. I just come out with things that people either find shocking or like, whoa, that's so cool. And, tell all these stories of when I was in yachting or whatever. And also, I think it was something that the justification of the more I drank, the less hungover I'd be, which is weird. But like if I drank more consistently, I wouldn't then be hungover. I guess I'd just be consistently drunk for a while. And so for me, like if I have a big night, for example, on Saturday, I would drink a lot on Friday. And then on Saturday, I don't know. Yeah, it's really tough. I guess there's so many justifications that I have surrounding it, and I can find one in every corner, I suppose.
Yeah. I remember a really good one that you mentioned was, well, I don't drink a bottle of vodka in the morning, therefore I'm not an alcoholic.
I think when I first decided to do this, I was like, was I an alcoholic? And I wasn't really sure. So I went online and I found the definition of an alcoholic, and I looked at all the points, and there was about 15 points. And I was every single one of those, apart from the one that was, I don't open a bottle of vodka in the morning. I don't have it with my breakfast. Yeah. That was the only one that I didn't do. And then I was like, actually, I would be quite partial to a mimosa with brunch. And I was like, so technically that's not even true. I was like, mimosas. So I think you have a vision in your mind of what an alcoholic looks like. And for me, I was always like, no, but I don't need it every day. And then by 5 o'clock, I'm like, oh, I love a glass of wine. Open a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not doing anything tomorrow, or I don't have to be up that early, or I'll just have a couple. And then, I know that a couple would turn into one more, or, there's just so many different angles where I could justify it at any stage, I think.
Yeah.
I'd find a reason.
So for both of you, you're in serious relationships, and obviously you're surrounded by people that care and love you. What were the comments, or what were they saying to you with regards to your relationship with alcohol? Do you remember? Yeah, do you actually remember what they were saying?
Culturally, within my family, we don't have a strong alcohol. It's not culturally strong in our family to drink a lot. So it was interesting that it just happened to be a nature of who I was growing up with, I suppose, that led to my drinking of alcohol. So I had an extremely supportive father who he actually didn't drink at all. Now he has a few casual glasses of Pinot here and there, but he didn't drink at all when I was growing up, like zero. He was complete abstinence, and so. And I suppose he just thought it was part of growing up, which it is in a lot of ways in Australia. So they didn't really see it as much of an issue. But I think definitely in my late teens and my early 20s, my dad, who was very understanding, was just like, maybe it's okay to not drink so much sometimes, And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, Dad. He's like, you would feel better about yourself if you weren't so hungover. Just take it from me. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever, Dad. I didn't really take it on board until things escalated to being quite bad in my mid 20s and my mid to early to mid 20s. Then he was really, really supportive, and he was really, really good, and he understood. I suppose he's not a counselor. He didn't really know how to do it, but he was always really supportive of me and understanding of what it was, even though he didn't really have much experience with it himself. So for me, that was great, having my father's support. Initially, your friends, they don't really understand it. Like when initially you try to tackle it, when you're trying to reduce your intake, because to them, they don't have to have your hangover. So they think it's hilarious. They think it's great. They love Drunkari. So for them, they were like, what? No, come on. One of my very good friends, he'd have a saying when he'd say, no, come out just for a couple of quiet Jaeger bombs. All right? If you're not familiar with a Jaeger bomb, it's obviously shots. So no one goes out for quiet shots. So he knew that if he got a couple of Jaeger bombs into me, then it's game over. So, but after a while, I actually had a good chat with a friend, that same friend, in fact, and I told him how much I was struggling with it, and he was completely supportive. He couldn't believe, actually. He felt honored that I was reaching out to him. He's like, wow, thank you for reaching out to me, and I'm going to help you with this. And he helped me a lot to just be accountable, and also not to feel guilty about being hungover when I was, or not being able to keep control of my intake as well. And that was really important, to have a peer, I suppose, sort of look at you in the eyes without judgment. And then you yourself, you don't feel, because quite often as an alcoholic, you feel like a piece of shit. Basically, at the end of the day, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm a piece of shit. I can't control myself. I can't keep on top of things. What's wrong with me? And you sort of see other people out there in the world, and you think, what is wrong with me? Because you don't see everyone else's problems and hardships they're having, and everyone's struggling for something. And a lot more people than I think we're willing to admit struggle with alcoholism. So to have a friend be able to just sort of look you in the eye, face you, not have that judgment, meant a lot to me. I think that was a big issue, a big reason why I was eventually able to conquer it.
Yeah, wow, thank you for sharing. Sally, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of my relationship with Alex, we to get away from the boat, we often would go to a bar in the evening, and so our relationship basically started drinking a lot together. And Alex can drink a whole lot more than I can and be okay. And it wasn't until sort of maybe a couple of years into our relationship where he's like, you have to stop matching what I'm drinking. Because I would match exactly what he was drinking, but obviously I'd be like totally drunk, not be able to talk, but like waddle along like next to him, like, I'm okay, and just trying to keep up with that was just impossible. And I think that's where he first made it apparent that I needed to like slow down and not drink the same as him and things. So that was definitely like the first point with maybe not the first point, in relationships. It's always affected relationships throughout my life. And then, I think my sort of going into family a little bit, like my granddad died of alcohol abuse. So in my mind, I've always sort of looked at that and thought, need to be careful just in case it's hereditary, which I don't know whether that's true or not, but I need to keep that in the back of my mind. Since I decided to give up alcohol, I explained to my mum, and she was like, oh, like, you don't drink that much. And I was a bit like, no, I do, like I drink a lot. And she was like, oh yeah, well, you know, I try and have one night off a week. Oh, I don't even know why I do that, really. And I was a bit like, okay. And the last time I spoke to her, and I guess it's been on my mind since I spoke to her, but she didn't even ask me. She didn't even ask how it was going. I dropped it in a few times of, oh, I've been down to the beach for a few sundowners, non-alcoholic, obviously. And she didn't ask about it at all. And I was really like I guess looking at it, thinking like, maybe her problem's bigger than we think, or she knows, because she's not even acknowledging, because she knows we drink very similar ways. And you know, when we sit on a Skype phone call, we'd often drink a bottle of wine together, and it was one of the things that I was like, wow, I really have to stop, because I wouldn't remember finishing the phone call. And that's like sitting at home alone talking to my mum. So it was kind of like a really big thing for me. And that it's been a little bit to process, I guess. But the relationship, sorry, I can't really remember what the actual question was.
It's a very good point that you're mentioning. And I think if you look at the cycle of change, there needs to be self-awareness that there is a problem, and there needs to be a willingness to change. If those two aren't there, you're sitting in denial and you're not ready for change. And that's why there's that saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think that's the hardest for both. So say if that was the case for your mum, like for you to see life on the other side and to recognize there is a problem, and you do have the willingness and motivation to change, and maybe you're looking at the dynamic from a different lens, and you're both holding up mirrors, and the one doesn't want to look at themselves in the mirror, whereas perhaps for you, you're willing to look at yourself in the mirror, and because you care about your mum so much to see where she's at, you might see a bit of you in her, and that could also trigger you and make you feel sad.
Yeah, definitely.
Ari, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are.
I don't really have anything to add there, because I think Sally really nailed it. I mean, I was nodding here in agreement as she was sort of fleshing out the thoughts, and to me it sounds quite obvious. Again, I really hate to comment too much, because I'm just not an expert in these things, but just judging from the way that you presented the story, Sally, I think you really nailed it there. I think your mother also is probably in a state of denial, and by her listening to you, if she needed to offer support or guidance, she would have to confront her own reality, which she's not ready to do at the moment. So that's probably why she can't quite offer you the support that would be really, really helpful to you right now. You know, it's very powerful, I suppose, that feeling of having to look at yourself through the looking glass and just be upfront with yourself. It's painful. It's painful to do. So, and she's not quite ready yet. Hopefully she'll get there.
So from both of your perspective, in terms of friends, family who want to support someone who is having struggles with managing the use of alcohol, what do you think they could do to be supportive? What does that look like? think about where you were at. What do you
I
need?
suppose, really, you've got to, it's until that thing you were mentioning, Karine, when you were saying, the self-awareness, like it's really hard to make someone else self-aware. So someone has to sort of come to the conclusion themselves and show that spark. So for example, no one's going to, me through my journey, if I go up to someone else to tell them that they've got an alcohol problem, whether it's true or not, it's really, really hard to hear that from someone else. Like, I don't know the strategies you have to sort of bring that awareness to someone else, whether that it even exists. I just don't know. But once they're at that point, you just have to be understanding and non-judgmental. I think that for me was the best, like having people who are non-judgmental and just willing to listen was huge, because all of a sudden that feeling of guilt and that feeling of shame wasn't there anymore. I'm like, oh, great. Why didn't I talk about this earlier? Because to have people that don't treat you in that way just allows you to stop worrying about that and then start worrying about the problem. So I'd say that's the best you can do to be supportive, is just be supportive as possible.
And that was the big thing coming up for me, being non-judgmental, because that's huge. Because you were referring to before about belief systems and, not feeling good enough perhaps, and thinking you're the only one who's struggling right now. And when we sit with guilt and shame and we feel judged, we're more likely to drink more to mask it. And then it just becomes a vicious cycle.
I'd agree with that 100%.
Yeah. It's hard though when you can see someone hurting themselves and you've got to sit in that and not make side comments. And as I said before getting on this call, like it's a different experience for me working with clients versus friends and family. And I struggle with that.
100%. I think having some distance from it can definitely help from a counseling perspective. I would say, like if you're distanced from something, it would be much more easy to approach it and look at things, I suppose, a little analytically, because you're not thinking perhaps how it affects you directly. But I think, for instance, if someone in my life was struggling a lot with it these days, because I have my own personal journey, it's much easier, I suppose, because then I can just sort of tell them my story, and then instantly they're like, oh, okay, well, you've gone through it, and I make a point of not being judgmental and saying, and being quite open to the fact that I failed many times in my journey, but eventually I did succeed. And it took me a lot longer than it would probably take a lot of other people if they knew what I knew now, and that if you reach out, if you talk to people, like by the time I actually openly expressed my thoughts verbally about the pain I was feeling, years and years and years had gone by, years of wasted time, basically, in which I could have been making myself feel better as a person and tackling this, and perhaps even just having a more positive relationship with alcohol in general. That what took me 10 years or 12 years or maybe even 15 years to accomplish would hopefully with the way that we're more open and talking about these things these days, take someone a much shorter amount of time. And I'm really hopeful, and I'm really optimistic that Sally's journey is going to be a whole lot faster than mine and a whole lot easier. And I think we've got modern times to thank for that, and people being more open to talking about these kind of things, which is fantastic. But I think having the conversation is already a win. So having the conversation with people is massive. So I think that's what we can do. And if you can think about ways to have the conversation with perhaps some people you think are suffering with it in a non-judgmental way, it's easier said than done, I know. But if you can figure out a way to do that, then perhaps you can get them to see that maybe they want to make better life choices for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So with all of us, our background in yachting, we are quite aware of what the culture is like, and it's a massive drinking culture. I know back 10 years ago, we were always talking about going for rosé lunches, and it would just go on for hours. And I've never been a massive drinker. I think I had way too many drinks on my 30th, and I've never been able to drink too much since. I've got a cap of 2 drinks and then I'm done. But I remember as a yachtie, I got to a point where I was just like trying to chuck my shooters in the bush without them seeing. And how do you because you get so sucked into it, that lifestyle. And as a yachty, how do you deal with that and differentiate between what's normal and what's not normal?
Yeah, yachting is special in that it's a bubble outside of reality, and that there's expectations in the yachting industry to be super professional, but you've also got to be super fun. You've got to be a really, you live with the people you work with, so you can't, I had this issue exactly on the boat when I was going through my, through long periods of abstinence. I'd be on the boat, and I was finding, as a bosun working on board, it was a little bit hard sometimes to connect with the lads, and it's really important as a bosun. You got 5 guys that you're looking after. You've got to build relationships with these guys. It's incredibly important. And you've got to do it in a way. I benefited, just verbalizing my thoughts here, is that I benefited from being a little bit older. I joined yachting when I was 28. So not to say that's old necessarily, but it's older than the norm. So I naturally was older than the guys that I was working with. So I could take a more of an uncle style figure, take more of a mentor figure. And I guess there wasn't as big an expectation from them on me to drink as much. And I could also say to the guys with a bit of authority to say, guys, I'm really happy for you to go out and have fun, but you've also got to keep, you have to be sober for work. That's end of the story. Yeah. So I managed to create that identity for myself, and that, I was kind of the letter of the law, and that I kept things under control. And it doesn't help when you've got chief officers and maybe even captains in some people's situation drinking just as much. But you still will get support from people. Well, I got support from other people that perhaps drank too much, that I was trying to keep that culture under wraps. But again, you have to be pragmatic. You have to understand that it is part of the culture. So it's about harm reduction, not complete abstinence, because guys are going to party, guys are going to drink, and you have to allow them to, because some guys' motivation and some girls' motivation, is to come into the industry is to have fun. Yeah. They're there to travel the world, make a bit of cash, and have the time of their life. And it's not up to me to take that away from them, but I can provide the structure of what's appropriate and what's, more importantly, safe. And that's what I always tried to do. And I had incredible, I guess, success with that. I found that there was no gray area with that for me, because I guess through my own journey, my own battles, I always, on the yacht, from a position of authority, led by example. I was always the guy that was home by midnight. I was always the guy that showed up to work sober. So for me, there was no grey area. I mean, there's a story with this chief officer that I won't mention names. I think I've chatted about it perhaps with you in the past. I've definitely talked about it publicly. A guy that I detest, that would have the worst morals, where he would tell someone that was hungover, just on the chance that he wasn't hungover, he would throw someone under the bus, put them on a weekend watch of this and that. But then, he'd show up to work an hour late sometimes. And you're like, where's the consistency there? So that's, sorry, I went off on a tangent. I actually forgot the initial question, but that's my experience with it, in that, I guess, the question was, how do we deal with it as a culture in yachting? We have to be open to the fact that it is going to be apparent, and we just have to find that balance in between what's fun and what's safe, to sum it all up.
Yes, 100%. And that's why processes, procedures are designed to keep us safe. And it's about being accountable too. Yeah.
Definitely. Accountability is 100%. Yeah.
So for those who have watched this interview, and they might be thinking, oh, hold on a minute. Do I drink too much? I end up, coming back on board at 2 a.m. and it's quite a frequent thing. And I know of some crew who have been let go because they were drinking on the job and filling up their water bottles with a spirit so that they couldn't detect it. So that is a very clear sign that there's something wrong. But if you wanted to learn more about whether you do have an issue with alcohol, what would your suggestion be?
to learn more, I think for me, I couldn't give you one resource. I think there's a great one that used to pop up. I guess the algorithms realized on my Facebook and my Google and everything that I've been looking for these things. But you hear about this 1 year no beer challenge, which is a really great. Have you heard of this? 1 year no beer. No. It's an accountability program basically. It's people that get together on a forum. I never partook in it. I just thought it was a great idea, and it'd always pop up in my advertisements. And you pay a nominal fee, and so you can be part of this community in which you attempt to go. A certain amount of time without abstaining from alcohol, and it starts at a month, and then you can do 3 months, and then the ultimate challenge is 1 year no beer. And that's great. It's great because if you look at that 1 year no beer, there's a lot of people that give their experiences with alcohol, which is confronting because, like we've been talking about, there's a lot of justification, and you think, no, I'm not an alcoholic because of the 15 things like Sally was talking about. There's actually 2 that I'm not. So how can I be that person when I'm only 13 out of 15? When realistically, I think if you're 13 out of 15, you're probably well on the way. So that's a great resource to just see other people's things and think, okay, right. I might be what's called, a functioning alcoholic or even a highly functioning alcoholic, and that I rely on it. It has a detrimental effect on my health and well-being, but I still get by in life. And maybe even I'm achieving a lot compared to a lot of other people. But if you wake up the next day with a feeling of shame, with a feeling of, I wish I didn't do that, that to me is the ultimate sign of you're an alcoholic. Okay, if you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm a bit hungover, but you go out and you have a great time that day, and there are people that live that way, and that to me, they're not alcoholics because they don't live with that feeling of shame, and that is the line for me. I think there are people out there that can quite happily have, as long as it's not impacting their health too negatively, they can have drinks most nights of the week and function and not have any bad feeling. I don't know. Again, I'm not a doctor. So I'm sure there's some very severe health implications otherwise, but from the emotional and mental well-being, I think that's where the alcoholic should be defined. And I think more people are like that than we care to admit.
Wonderful advice. Thanks, Ari. And I just wanted to add to that. I think it's important as a way to build self-awareness to just take note of your patterns and behaviors, because then you can look back and go, oh gosh, I have had, been out 5 times this week and have drunk a lot. And so that, to see that on paper, I think is so effective to be able to gain more insight into your behaviors. So you just track it. Yeah. Excellent. Sally.
I was going to say that, one of the things that started creeping up for me was hearing other people speaking about alcohol. Going back to the interview was the sort of start, and then I was discussing the other day with friends, like they were saying, oh yeah, it's really nice to have like a couple of beers at sundown, and then they're like, yeah, no, I could happily not drink anymore after that. And I was like, whoa, like after I've had 2 beers, that's it for me. Like I want to drink more. And I was like, yeah, I'm totally not that person. So it was all these like little accounts that I've now been listening to that sort of not swayed my mind, helped me realize that actually I'm not that sort of normal person with a normal relationship with alcohol. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you for sharing. And I just wanted to say a big thank you for showing up, both of you, and talking about such a personal topic. I have no doubt that there are going to be so many takeaways out of this conversation. And I just wanted to check in with you both. Are you okay if the audience reaches out? They might have some questions. They're more than welcome to ask me. I'm always here, but it's also nice to connect with people. I know in prison they used to say, well, did you suffer from a heroin addiction? How do you know what it's like? But I think, with regards to that comment, we say like if you want to reach out for help and say you have you'd need back surgery, do you go to a GP or do you go to a specialist to deal with your back? That's how we gave insight to the prisoners. But I know that it is helpful talking to someone that has gone through the experience themselves. So are you open to people reaching out?
I definitely am. I mean, I talk a lot with the yachting community on many different topics and aspects. So, and if that's something that people want to talk about with someone, then I'm happy to share my experience and listen to their experience.
Thanks, Ari.
Yeah, the same here. I mean, I don't feel I have a huge amount to offer on the flip side just yet, but yeah, I'm more than happy to connect with people. If anyone is at the early stages or thinking of doing it, yeah, I'm totally happy to listen and offer guidance if or where I can.
Thank you both. And what is the best means to contact you?
Probably Instagram.
Yep. And
yeah, Instagram for me. I mean, I've got a few different accounts on Instagram. So you could type my name in, Ari, A-R-I, Steele, S-T-E-E-L-E. And I've got one that I'm actually trying to push into a more yacht-centric one, which is Super Yacht Journey. Just one word, Super Yacht Journey. And you're more than happy, welcome to add me on that, and we can talk about anything yachting, really.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ari. And Sally, your handle?
It's Sally_Kip, KIP_Cooks.
Perfect. Thank you both, and especially joining me on a gorgeous Saturday and taking your time out of your weekend to do this. Really appreciate it. And I will hopefully see you guys in TCC Tribe on Thursday.